This show is intended for general purposes only, as individual situations may vary. Statements made should not be relied upon as recommendations or solicitation. When discussed, past performance is no guarantee or indication of future results. Nelson Financial Planning offers securities through Nelson Ivest Brokerage Services, member FINRA, and SIPC.
Good Sunday morning. This is Bud Hettinger. Next on News Radio 102.5 WFLA, the longest-running radio show in Central Florida, Dollars and Cents, with my good friend Joel Garris from Nelson Financial Planning. You can call him at the office this week at 407-629-6477 to schedule your free consultation to discuss your retirement plans. Or you can talk to him right now at 407-916-5400.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the program Dollars and Cents. My name is Joel Garris, and you're listening to Central Florida's longest-running radio program. Started back in 1984 by my father-in-law, Jack Nelson. Continued today by me, yours truly. As usual on the program, we've got a full suite of things to talk about. We'll talk about 529s. The rules on those changed this year as a result of the Tax Act that was passed at the end of the year. And so we'll talk about some of the different ways that you can use a 529 account that you did not or were not able to use before, along with some of the more interesting ways in which to use money in a 529. A 529 is something that is set up for educational purposes. So it's sort of like an account that you would have set up to, in fact, wind up having some money set aside to educate the kids. The options there are much, much greater. So we'll tackle that on the program. Of course, we'll talk about the week that was. We've got some conversations on tariffs and whatnot, and a bit of a changing of the guard as it relates to the Dow Industrials, the last remaining component from the original incarnation of the Dow Jones Industrial Average is being sadly kicked to the curb. So we'll talk about who that is and why. And then we will also tackle the notion of the deductibility of home equity line debt. There's a lot of confusion on this topic based upon the tax changes that were passed at the end of last year, suggesting that you just can't use home equity debt at all in terms of being able to write that interest off. That's not quite the case. We'll explain where that comes from. But before, of course, we get to all of that, I need to talk about this article, front page of the weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal, entitled "Time Bomb Looms for Aging America. Low incomes, paltry savings, and debt leave many baby boomers unprepared for retirement." And that will certainly be our leadoff topic because that's of probably the greatest importance. And then, of course, we are here sitting in the studio. So if you've got a topic that you'd like to add to our preset list of topics, feel free to give us a call and throw us a topic, because we're happy to talk about anything and everything that might be on our listening audience's minds out there. So to do that, you just have to pick up the phone, 407-916-5400. That's how you can call the radio studio, or you can also do 855-545-1025. So that's the 800 number. You can also text the studio at 23680. or you can send me an email directly at joel@nelsonfinancialplanning.com. So NELSON, financialplanning.com. So those are all the different ways that you can get in touch with us and add your 2 cents into the program or redirect us in terms of our topics to something that you want to specifically hear about. So, the article from the Wall Street Journal in this weekend's really does paint a pretty tough picture. And obviously, there's a lot of reasons and explanations behind it. Some of them are just some disturbing statistics across the board. And we wanted to kind of share with you them so that we can talk about them. So, generally speaking, today, more than 40% of households headed by people aged 55 through 70 lack sufficient resources to maintain their living standard in retirement. A Wall Street Journal analysis concluded that equates to about 15 million American households. They also suggest that the surge of aging baby boomers is leaving the country with fewer young workers to support the elderly as folks work longer and certainly past the normal retirement age. What are the issues? Well, it's issues that we talk about a lot on this program. High debt, often as a result of trying to help out their kids getting education, goes back to the educational cost. Also, healthcare cost, and a lot of folks wind up dipping into their savings to care for their aging parents, along with not saving enough in 401ks. And the flip side of that is not having the options available for pensions as readily as they were when perhaps the prior generation was still working. The article continues on. Households with 401k investments and at least one worker age 55 through 64, so that would be the group that has retirement sort of, or in theory has retirement right around the corner. The median account balance for that group, $135,000 in a tax-advantaged retirement account. That's a big problem, because if there's only $135,000 in there, that's not exactly going to be large enough to generate much in terms of income. Might get $6,000-$7,000 a month off of that, but that's not a whole lot. So that is a tough statistic. The percentage of families with any debt headed by people age 55 or older has risen steadily for more than the past 2 decades, from a percent of 54% in 1992 to 68% in 2016. Couple that with the fact that Americans aged 60 through 69 had about $2 trillion in debt in 2017, which represents an increase of 11% per capita from 2004. Excuse me again. They had $168 billion in outstanding car loans in 2017, 25% more per capita than in 2004. They also had 6 times as much student loan debt in 2017 than they did in 2004. That is a litany of statistics that underscores the problem. The problem, along with rising healthcare costs, and the article continues on, rising healthcare costs. Interestingly, one of the other things that it says is people trying to do it themselves in terms of the investing. When you have volatile markets like 2000 and 2008, those market declines can very quickly reveal the perils of do-it-yourself retirements, as many 401k participants cut back on the contributions, shifted funds out of stocks, and never put them back in, or simply withdrew money to pay bills. Bottom line, the takeaway on that article really is a couple of different things. Number one, it really is up to you. Now, more than ever, certainly the world that we live in requires you to be the one to save money. So what you need to be doing, whether you're 65 or 55 or 45 or 35, is really taking a look at your overall income and your overall expenses. And folks, it's pretty straightforward. The problem is it's sort of hard to do in practice. And that is, take a look at those expenses and figure out which ones you can eliminate. By eliminating those expenses, maybe you can then take that extra money and put it towards paying off your debt or trying to put more into your retirement account. These numbers and these statistics and the problem with debt, particularly debt, the rising amount of debt in that age group of 60 to 69, really underscores the issue of a group that needs to really take a look at those expenses and figure out ways to cut out those expenses that are not necessities in life in order to change this path that all of these statistics point to, that there's a whole heck of a lot of people, 40%, that's almost half, is rapidly running down a road that's going to lead to a pretty unhappy retirement. You've got to make some changes now in order to be able to have a chance. These statistics and these numbers are just overwhelming. As I was reading the article, and it's a pretty long article in the Wall Street Journal this weekend, it saddened me, to say the least, because that's the time when you are thinking about pulling back from work. Maybe you're tired of working. Maybe you've got some health issues that present a problem in terms of your ability to do what you used to do. And unfortunately, some pretty rough numbers and some pretty rough statistics across the board. Very sobering article. And unfortunately, the only way to make a change if you find yourself in that group is to start now. Delaying it is not going to make it better. And really take a look at how you're spending your money in order to eliminate and cut things down to the necessities so that you can put yourself in better condition so that you can cover the necessities in retirement, because those costs are going up and there's not a safety net out there besides the amount that you'll get from Social Security. But let's face it, that won't cover anywhere near what's needed to kind of cover the general expenses of life. So some sobering statistics. I would encourage listeners, if they find themselves in that group that is struggling or looks like it's going to be very much on the path of struggling with low 401k balances, high debt, educational expenses, all of those kinds of things, to really take a hard look at it immediately to try and reverse that course of action. That's a pretty scary and sobering course of action when you take a look and read through all of these different numbers and statistics that we were rattling off. So we start the show with a little bit of a sobering note. We'll shift gears and talk a little bit about the week that was in the markets when we return here on Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning, and you're on News Radio 102.5 WFLA.
Download the free iHeartRadio app today.
This is Bud Hedinger. You know, you can talk to Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning right now on Dollars and Cents about anything to do with your money by calling 407-916-5400. Give him a call. It's time to make sense of your dollars.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. We'll shift gears in this segment after that sobering introduction. Some statistics that we share with you based upon the article entitled Time Bomb Looms for Aging America in this weekend's Wall Street Journal. Low incomes, paltry savings, and debt leave many boomers unprepared for retirement. In fact, estimating more than 40% of households headed by people aged 55 through 70 lack sufficient resources to maintain their living standard in retirement. The real problems, the real culprits, nothing new. Higher debt load, helping kids with college education, helping parents with the cost of health care, along with facing your own health care costs, lower retirement savings, much higher per capita outstanding loans in that category. A very sad and sobering perspective on it. What can you do? Well, you better do something, right? Starting now, look at your expenses. What can be cut? What can be changed to hopefully reverse this trend, particularly if you're looking at your numbers and you feel like you're going to be in that 40% of Americans that you're not going to be able to maintain your standard of living in retirement. You need to take a look at it. Don't just put your head in the sand on it. These are some pretty tough numbers. We will shift gears. This segment in the program, we'll talk about the week that was. But before we talk about the week that was, I did invite folks to reach out to us and toss us a topic of their choosing, either through the phone lines here at the studio at 407-916-5400 or toll-free 855-545-1025, or they can text us 23680, or in the case of Bob, he emailed us at joel@nelsonfinancialplanning.com. And Bob's question is, if I want to retire at 58 with a pension, when can I withdraw from my 457 New York State Deferred Compensation Plan? Great question, Bob. We always appreciate those. Here's the unique characteristics about 457 Deferred Compensation Plans. You actually get to withdraw from them at any age once you leave the employ of that agency. So good news there is, even though you're not the sort of traditional 59 and a half age, at which would allow you to access whatever retirement money that you have without having to pay any kind of early withdrawal penalty or anything like that, on a deferred comp, that rule does not apply. It's really any age. So the important part, Bob, that you want to make sure here is that you don't want to take that deferred comp and roll it over to an IRA, because then you would be stuck with the rules of the IRA. So leave that account right where it is. Use it right where it is, how it's set up right now as a deferred comp, because you can use that without having to worry about an early withdrawal penalty. At 59 and a half, it doesn't really matter where it is. If you're looking to consolidate and simplify things, sure, fine. You want to roll it over to an IRA, that's fine, because at 59 and a half, it doesn't really matter where the money is. But at 58, as you point out, if that's where it does matter. So the deferred comp would give you that flexibility to be able to use the money in that account without having to worry about that penalty for being under age 59 and a half. So great question, Bob. Certainly appreciate that. And certainly one of those things that I think most people are unaware of, that the deferred comp 457s really do have a different feature as it relates to age, which really has a tremendous amount of flexibility for folks that are retiring a little bit earlier at a little bit earlier age, much like Bob is looking into. So certainly we appreciate that email from Bob. And again, we're always willing to add other topics to our list of topics. You know, every Sunday morning we like to come in here and certainly have a full suite of topics, but we're always open to the addition of a few more. So don't hesitate to give us a call at 407-916-5400. Toll free 1-855-545-1025. Texting 23680, or the email Joel at nelsonfinancialplanning.com. So, big news for the week ahead. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is changing. And in fact, the last original member of the Dow Jones Industrial Average is out. And it's General Electric. So General Electric was the original member of the Dow in 1896. It's been a continuous member of that index that consists of 30 stocks since 1907. General Electric out. Who's in? Walgreens. And it's actually Walgreens Boots Alliance. Okay. So Walgreens is in. A little bit of a ripple effect, or I guess a reaction being described by some as a misstep at the Dow, that Walgreens was the right company to swap in. There has been a lot of suggestion that company should have been Facebook, which is by valuation the world's fifth largest company. The reaction from the folks at the Dow Jones Industrial Average is that they wanted to make sure that group of 30 stocks had a little bit more of a healthcare component to it to address that, rather than continue to maintain a little bit, or had they added Facebook, it would have made it a little bit more heavy on the tech side of things. But that is significant of sorts, right? Because the Dow Jones Industrial Average, 30 companies, that's not a lot. So when one goes, one comes in, it certainly always creates some headlines. So since 1999, just to put it in perspective, there's been a changeover of about 17 stocks. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average doesn't change very often. So in the past 19 years, there's only been 17 changes of the companies that make up that index. This coming week, we will see another change, and that is the swapping out of General Electric for Walgreens. Many are describing that as a bit of a misstep, that it should have been Facebook instead of Walgreens. But so some interesting, I guess, turn of events, if you will, if you're watching the markets and the headlines. I'm sure we'll see and hear a bit more of that over the course of this coming week, because the effective date on that is actually on Tuesday. I think I said Wednesday earlier, but it's on Tuesday when that change happens. We will slide to the break here at the bottom of the hour. When we get back, we'll talk some tariff stuff, because obviously that was a dominating part of the headlines this past week. And so we will seek to bring some perspective on that here on Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. You're listening to News Radio 1025 WFLA.
This is Bud Hedinger. You know, you can talk to Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning right now on Dollars and Cents about anything to do with your money by calling 407-916-5400. Give him a call. It's time to make sense of your dollars.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Dollars and Cents here on News Radio 1025 WFLA. In this part of the segment of the program, we'll talk a little tariff action because that's obviously getting a lot of conversation. Interestingly, the markets haven't really overreacted to the conversation. I mean, certainly the past couple of weeks have been not great weeks for the market. The Dow this past week was down a little over 500 points. But considering the headlines, it is not a whole lot of excessive conversation, or I guess excessive reaction by the markets. And so we wanted to spend some time talking a little bit about that and giving some perspective on it, because certainly you're hearing an awful lot of back and forth when it is a part of the headline. So to recap where we are, the tariffs that have been announced on a tit-for-tat basis is that the U.S. has announced that tariffs would be on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods. China responded, well, that's fine. We're going to do tariffs on $50 billion of the U.S. goods. And so now the Trump administration is considering imposing an additional $200 billion, a tariff on additional $200 billion of Chinese products. And now here's where it gets interesting. China can certainly respond with more tariffs, but would find itself rapidly running out of goods to tax because it only imports $130 billion of goods from the U.S. So stop and think about these numbers, if you will. The tariff amounts going back and forth limit China to really what it can do, because we obviously import more from them than they do from us. So this is kind of fascinating how this conversation is taking place. Well, some people would argue that it's really not much of a conversation. It's really more of a, kind of a tweet fest. But if you think of it as somewhat of a conversation and you actually look at the numbers, it's interesting that there is a limit. There is more of a limit to what China can do because we import a whole lot more from them than they do from us. Now, the reality is, and our thesis on that is that ultimately you will see some kind of a resolution on these issues simply because, as the market seems to suggest, investors suspect that the U.S. has the upper hand on this. And when you start to look at the numbers, there's certainly a school of thought that would support that, right? So if we keep upping the ante in terms of what we are doing in terms of tariffs, at some point, what China can respond to kind of limits itself out at that $130 billion number because that's what they import, which goes back to the whole reason why we're having this conversation is because of the massive trade deficit that exists. So, but be careful on this, as we have said, because a tariff on $50 billion of goods would be the equivalent of about a tenth of a point hit on the GDP. If it goes to $200 billion, effectively it's a hit of about 0.2%. And then at that point, you wind up losing some of the estimated economic benefits from those tax cuts that passed at the end of last year. Combined with the obvious, it certainly creates a lot of uncertainty for corporate America to be able to react and adjust, along with consumers that obviously will just hear the headlines and ultimately may very well react to the headlines themselves. So certainly a topic that we're going to hear an awful lot more of over the next weeks in front of us, but just some perspective on kind of the numbers and the going back and forth and what the limiting factor is, particularly if you're on the China side of the equation, which is that you just don't import that much from us. And so, or in relative terms to what we import from China. So one of the reasons why we haven't had as big a reaction, I think, in the market is because of the reality of those numbers. But obviously stay tuned on that, because that certainly could create a sentiment reaction, assuming that this does not get resolved in some form and fashion. I suspect that, in fact, it does. Obviously, stay tuned on that. Another thing to stay tuned on is whether you can, in fact, deduct your home equity interest. And so we want to spend some time talking about that, because there's a lot of confusion over whether you can, in fact, still deduct interest that is on a home equity line after the 2018 tax changes all come into play. So we'll tackle that topic next here on the program after these messages here on Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. You're listening to News Radio 1025 WFLA.
This is Bud Hedinger. You know, you can talk to Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning right now on Dollars and Cents about anything to do with your money by calling 407-916-5400. Give him a call. It's time to make sense of your dollars.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. This segment of the program, we're going to be talking about the new rules for deduction of mortgage interest. A lot of confusion about that. The biggest issue is that the aggregate amount of that debt can now not exceed $750,000 versus before, where the amount of mortgage interest that was deductible could have gone all the way up to $1 million. Just as an aside, I would say if you've got $750,000 of mortgage debt or $1 million of mortgage debt, that may be a little heavy. Okay, and I would urge you to listen to the first part of the program where we talked a lot about the fact that there's a whole slew of people out there who are facing a decline in their standard of living at retirement because they've got too much debt. If you've got more debt than what these limits are, you probably might find yourself in that category, that you're maybe making a lot of money, but clearly spending a whole ton of money as well. But yes, one of the biggest changes was to reduce that aggregate limit of interest that you could write off, or the aggregate limit of the debt. The interest associated with the aggregate limit of the debt is now, instead of $1 million, it's $750,000. Existing mortgages were grandfathered in. So if you've got a mortgage that's above $750,000, the change of the limit down to $750,000 doesn't really apply. But one of the tweaks of this is the conversation about home equity loans, and so home equity loans there's some confusion over whether you're going to be able to write that interest off, and the reality is it goes back to what you're ultimately using that home equity loan for. So if you're using it to make improvements on the property to which it is borrowed against, that's not going to be a problem. You're going to be able to write that mortgage interest off without any issue whatsoever. However, if you do a home equity line to pay off credit card debt or student loan debt or whatever the case may be, that's not going to work. Okay, and again, anything that is anything that was that you've done in the past, that's where this grandfather provision will not apply on home equity line debt. So if you did take out a home equity line a year ago, 5 years ago, and used that to pay off student loan debt or credit card debt or what have you, then that interest is now no longer deductible on a home equity line basis. Meanwhile, if you took the home equity line and borrowed money to fix up your house, then that will work, and that will still continue to work. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. Let's say you borrow the money to buy a second property. That will not work. The loan has to be on the second property, so the loan, the home equity line, has got to be attached to the property that those funds were used for the purchase of that property. So it gets a little convoluted, certainly a little bit more difficult to understand than it was before. Frankly, I think this area is going to be ripe for mistakes and people taking advantage of it, because I don't know how they're going to ever track a home equity line that's been in existence that you use to pay off consumer debt or use to consolidate debt. I'm not sure how they're ever going to kind of track that, but the reality is that the rules now say that home equity line debt, that mortgage interest, now no longer deductible if, and here's the big if it was used for something other than improving the property to which it's attached. So as long as that home equity line debt was used to fix up the current house that it's on, then you're fine. You're going to be able to write that mortgage interest off without any issue whatsoever. If it was used for other stuff, that's where the issue comes into play, and you may very well find that you would not be able to use that to help pay off and get that deduction for that mortgage interest. So certainly some different rules on that. We just wanted to take a few minutes on the program to maybe help clarify exactly what the nuances were of that. I think there's some major issues in terms of trying to figure out what's what on that and how ultimately that mortgage interest gets reported. If it still gets reported on a Form 1098, I don't know how they're going to know what that money was used for in the first place. But hey, we'll leave that up to the IRS to figure that one out. But just so you know, home equity line debt is certainly still, the mortgage interest on that, certainly still deductible, but it's got to be used to improve the property or to purchase the property and not for other things. So right now, the new rules basically are pushing people to make sure that they're using the debt for real estate related activity on that property that debt was taken on. So that's probably the biggest change in terms of what the numbers look like in terms of the ability to deduct the mortgage interest. We'll shift gears here in the last segment of the program to talk a little bit about 529s and how ultimately some of the ways in which 529s can be used and how that has changed, particularly over the course of the past year with these new tax changes that obviously affect your ability to deduct your mortgage interest. They also change the way in which you can use your 529. So one of the biggest changes is that you can use up to $10,000 in a 529 account. And again, a 529 account is one that's set up under the federal tax code that allows for withdrawals for eligible educational expenses to be tax-free. many states actually allow for contributions to be deducted from state income tax. Obviously, that doesn't apply here in Florida because we don't have a state income tax. But one of the biggest changes was that you could now use up to $10,000 to pay tuition for children attending kindergarten through 12th grade through private schools. So that's probably the biggest change that happened, is that you can actually use a 529 to pay elementary and secondary school tuition up to a limit of $10,000. And that's fine if you want to take advantage of that option. The concern that I would have is if you think elementary and secondary school tuition is pricey on a private school basis for elementary and secondary school and high school, what do you think college is going to look like? That's going to be incredibly expensive. So be careful about using the account now to cover elementary or high school tuition when you still have the college issue looming. And then when you take money out, if the kids are in elementary or high school, well, then guess what? The money's no longer in the account. The money no longer has the ability to grow on a tax-deferred basis. So certainly something you want to kind of take a minute and think a little bit about. The ability to use a 529 has certainly expanded. You can use it now for the tuition and other educational expenses at a variety of post-secondary institutions like community colleges or trade and vocational schools, graduate schools, even online course and degree programs. As long as they're accredited, you can use a 529 for that. Similarly, you can actually take money out of a 529 to cover the purchase of a computer or any related equipment or even internet access or computer software and even printers as well. So the ability to use and take withdrawals off of a 529 for generally anything technology or internet related, certainly a bit more expanded than it used to be. Similarly for yourself, you can set up a 529 for yourself and use that account to help fund maybe if you're thinking about pursuing a change of careers or looking to finish up education that you started years ago. You can certainly use a 529 account, particularly if the kids have gone through college and there's some money left over. You can, as a parent, take over an existing 529 plan and ultimately use that money to further your own educational expenses. There's no limitation on you doing that. Maybe the kids decided not to go to school after all, and you've got a 529 account there. And if it's something that you're personally doing, then you can certainly use that 529 for yourself. And ultimately, if that's something that you want to do, is to take courses even in retirement through a community college or anything along those lines, just to keep your intellect engaged, then certainly an ability to get and use the account in a 529 to help pay for those types of expenses. So bottom line on all of that, the ability to use a 529 really has expanded a lot over the years, and there's certainly some sort of non-traditional ways to use it that people wouldn't often think about using in the past. But certainly there's a lot more options to use it for things like community colleges or vocational schools, or even for yourself if there's money left over in there and you just want to start taking some classes at the local community college. Certainly those are funds that you can use, and ultimately when you do use them, they come out, remember, when they're used for educational purposes, they come out on a tax-free basis. So a lot of flexibility, a lot more flexibility on the options or the situations that you can, in fact, take money out of a 529 account. So really an expansionary use of 529 accounts, much more than it ever used to be. So perhaps one of those situations applies to you as well. So the music means that we are out of time for this week. So we will go ahead and wrap up the program. Thank you all for listening, and thank you for adding some topics to the conversation. We certainly appreciate that. We got an email from Bob. So, Bob, we appreciate that. And then we can obviously expand out the conversation anytime somebody does that. So thanks for listening to the program. We will wrap it up from here. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. You're listening to News Radio 102.5 WFLA.
This show is intended for general purposes only, as individual situations may vary. Statements made should not be relied upon as recommendations or solicitation. When discussed, past performance is no guarantee or indication of future results. Nelson Financial Planning offers securities through Nelson Ivest Brokerage Services, member FINRA, and SIPC.